I do think that some of the founding fathers, at least, had great epistemic humility and were much more flexible in their thinking than a lot of people in politics now. First of all, James Madison, who's considered the father of the Constitution, his last words on earth were that he changed his mind. And the second example is Ben Franklin said the older he gets, the less certain he is of his own opinions. So they were doing the sort of this cognitive bias, behavioral economics in a very primitive way 250 years ago.
Hello, friends, and welcome to the Win-Win Podcast. Today's episode is all about self-experimentation, because I'm speaking to AJ Jacobs. AJ is a journalist and author, best known for his crazy lifestyle experiments. For example, his year of living biblically, where he gave up modern life in order to follow the teachings of the Bible word for word. Or his most recent experiment, which is his year of living constitutionally. In other words, following the US Constitution by the letter. And as you can imagine, this has given him lots of insights into lots of the culture wars type topics that the US and indeed much of the Western world is currently struggling with today. He even dedicated an entire year of his life to read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica from start to finish. So, as you can imagine, AJ knows a lot of stuff. And I must say, this conversation does not disappoint. We dig into everything from how to maximize your health to how to trick yourself into building better habits and making them stick. We also discuss how to sort of find win-win solutions to tricky relationship things, like how to live out your full weird desires without upsetting your friends and family. So yeah, lots of gold in this one, especially for any of my fellow nerds, especially for puzzle lovers as well. Talk about those a lot too. So on that note, let's dig in. What have you got in the background there? Which puzzles?
This is our puzzle closet. So, we've got the presidents. We've got candy. That's a big hit.
I'm so stoked for this conversation because you might just be the most interesting person on earth. You have dedicated your life, or at least most of your life, to what are called immersions. For example, you did a month of outsourcing everything in your life to a team in Bangalore, India, up to and including arguments with your wife.
So true. Great month. Loved it.
You did a month of radical honesty where you said everything in your head out loud, no matter how egregious it might be.
Right. Terrible month. Horrible. Hated it.
I can imagine. You then spent a year living literally as the Bible describes we should live, complete with growing a beard or refusing to even touch or sit where your wife has sat while she was on her period.
That's right. It was in the Bible, and I thought I'm going to follow it as literally as possible because that's what fundamentalists say they do. So I thought I would see what it's actually like, and it was fascinating. It had its pros and cons. One of the cons was not being... Well, my wife sat in every seat in our apartment while she was menstruating.
On purpose?
Specifically, yes, just to mess with me. So I had to stand for the entire year. So it was a challenge.
I can imagine. Well, yeah, I want to dig into that one a lot. You also did, I think, 2 years of living as healthily as possible, kind of Brian Johnson style.
Exactly. 'Cause I needed 2 years for that one because I was so out of shape. And I have backslid a little. But yeah, I changed my diet, my exercise, but also my sleep, my stress management, the way I went to the bathroom, the whole thing. So top to bottom, literally.
Okay, so let's start on this health journey one.
Sure.
Okay, well, at a more meta level, what is the reason for turning yourself into a human guinea pig? Like, why are you doing this?
A couple of reasons. First, I love this way of learning, the experiential learning, the method acting. I don't think I'm a good actor, but this is sort of method writing. So I like to see the world from some other point of view, walk the walk, talk the talk, wear the robe and grow the beard. On another level, from a writing standpoint, I'd always been told, I love writing first person, but I'd always been told by writing teachers, write what you know, write what you experience. My life was not particularly interesting. I had a very nice mom and dad He wasn't an alcoholic. He wasn't a spy. There was nothing going on I could write there. So I thought, if I'm going to write, I should try to put myself in extraordinary situations and see what I can learn. Because that is the other thing. All of these, it's not just putting yourself into ridiculous situations, although that is part of it. The idea is to learn, to have some takeaways. There are going to be some horrible parts. There are going to be some wonderful parts. But in the end, I will hopefully have something useful that I can take with me in my normal life and also convey to the readers of the books.
Let's go digging into this healthcare or like living healthily one.
Yeah.
What did an average day look like?
Well, it was very stressful to be maximally healthy. It was like a 24-hour job, because you've got to prepare your food. You don't want to be eating processed food. You've got to sleep. You've got to meditate. You've got to massage. You got to pet dogs. There is a good amount of research that petting animals is good for you, lowers your blood pressure. You gotta see friends, because that is important. So one meta takeaway is, it is not healthy to be unhealthily obsessed with your health, because so much of your health stress is a huge part of living a healthy life.
Did you measure your cortisol levels?
I didn't measure. Oh wait, maybe I did. It's been a while. I measured as much as I could. It was sort of the beginning of the quantified self movement.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into that, and I went to a few meetings. But yeah, my one takeaway is, don't be overly obsessed with your health, because that's not healthy. So for instance, if you are so obsessed with having the right GMO and non-GMO, perfectly grown on an organic farm asparagus, and you can't go out to dinner with your friends at a regular restaurant, then that's not healthy, because having friends is really clearly linked to longevity.
Are you familiar with Brian Johnson?
No, who is he? Tell me again.
So he's become famous, or in some ways infamous, over the last year or so. He's this very wealthy guy who has decided to throw a huge sum of money at his health every year, to try out every longevity boosting thing possible. So a lot of it is very expensive, like cutting edge research, like special types of lasers to reverse sun damage. He's trying to reduce basically the age of all of his organs. And there are ways of measuring, whether it's like, telomere length, and all. There's different ways of quantifying and measuring age. And as far as metrics go, I mean, if what he's saying is true, and I mean, I believe it is true, he has managed to reverse the age of many of his different organs.
He has.
And his numbers are off the charts. But then he's also trying some really quite controversial stuff, such as having blood transfusions from his 18-year-old son.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that was big even back when I did it, which was like 10 years ago.
Did you try that?
I did not do it. My son was at the time about 3, so I felt I couldn't go vampire on him. But yeah, that was big in the Silicon Valley. So it's interesting and who knows, maybe it works. I mean, my feeling is a lot of these cutting edge technologies, we will not know whether they work for a long time, because it may shrink your telomeres, but who knows if the telomeres are actually going to cause you to live longer. So it is, I am very much, one of the other big takeaways was to be skeptical of falling in love with a single study. I am very much a meta study, or a meta study. I like the Cochrane, what is it called? The
Cochrane Report?
Yeah, the Cochrane Report, where they do meta studies, but even those sometimes are flawed. But the key is not to fall in love with the single study, because health media is the exact opposite of what you want. They are interested in what's new and unusual. So if you have one study that says, oh, bacon will make you live longer, that's going to get headlines, as opposed to the 800 other studies that say, no, it's probably not great for you. So sort of a Rotten Tomatoes look at science, where you look at the aggregate of what the studies say, and so for me, I hope Brian Johnson lives for 1,000 years and proves that these are viable and effective. But I would say I am not. I don't have the money to spend on it, and I'm going to wait and see. But I guess then I'll be dead by the time it turns out that he's right. So
Well,
he'll
maybe,
have the
maybe
last
not.
laugh.
I mean, that's the thing. In many ways, I think it's a very win-winny thing that he's doing, because he is using himself as a human guinea pig to test
Right.
out at a great expense for himself, to test out what works and what doesn't, and then he's giving away all that information for free. So,
Yeah, I did. That's true.
it's pretty cool.
And there are some heroes throughout history, like the person who figured out how yellow fever was transmitted, just exposed himself to mosquitoes, and he might have died. I have to look into that. But there have been scientists who say, "There's no one else to test it on. I'm going to test it on myself," and that, to me, is quite a heroic stance.
So, speaking of tests, you did that 2 years of living healthily. You also did a year of living biblically. So can you give us some examples of what that actually means?
Yeah, this came about because I grew up in a very secular home. So I am officially Jewish, but as I say in the book, I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian. So not very. But I was very interested in what is the appeal of religion? What is the allure? And I thought one way to learn about it would be to live it. So I read the Bible, Old and New Testament, and I made a list of all of the rules that it says you must live by. And there are hundreds of them. So I wanted to live by the famous ones, the 10 Commandments and love your neighbor, but also the ones that you mentioned about that you cannot touch women when they are menstruating. You cannot wear clothes made of two different kinds of fibers. Uh, yeah, that is it's a weird one, but it's in there.
Do you know the morality behind that one? What's the...
No one knows. I mean, there are a lot of theories. People come up with these ideas. Well, it could be, some people say it's because the farmers who grew the cotton hated the people who grew the wool, the herders, so they didn't want to mix. Honestly, there's no way of knowing. But the key is, fundamentalist religious people say they take the Bible literally. So that was one of the motivations, was saying, I am going to actually do it. You say you're doing it, but I have a feeling you're just cherry picking certain parts. You're not going all in. So, to use a poker phrase, so I am going to go all in and follow everything and see how it affects my life. See what makes my life better. And there were some things, and what is just strange. And in the end, one of the big takeaways was, do not take the Bible literally. We can, fundamentalists are A, not actually even doing it, and B, if you did it, it is a terrible idea. However, I like to always have some sort of gray area and show the good and the bad. So there were aspects of living by the Bible that were wonderful, like gratitude is a big theme in the Bible. So saying, realizing how much I take for granted and being thankful for every little thing, like that the elevator doesn't plummet to the basement when I get in. That is a lovely way to live, and made my life better in the long run.
Was there anything around like sacredness or like reverence? Did it teach you anything like that?
Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about sacredness, because, but I do think I did start to see the beauty of some rituals, and it doesn't have to be religious rituals. And in fact, there's a good book. There's several good books about sort of secular rituals. You don't have to believe in God to see the beauty of rituals, but they do give structure to our lives and meaning. They're an excuse to see friends. So I do. And I was always very skeptical of rituals, because I'm like, oh, they're not logical. They're not rational. But even the most rational people still do ritual. Like, there's still birthday cakes are not logical or rational. Putting like fire on top of sugar and singing a song, that's not particularly rational. So yeah, I'm very much came around on the importance of rituals in our lives.
Were there any sort of learnings from the Bible that you weren't expecting to find valuable, or did it like in any way shift your? Because you're an atheist, right?
I mean, agnostic. Who knows? But pretty much 80% atheist, 20% agnostic.
Did it shift you in any way towards like closer into agnosticism, or you stayed the same?
I mean, what's interesting is some people they categorize religion as having the 3 B's. So there's belief, belonging, and behavior. So belief in God, belonging to a community, and either ethical behavior or rituals. Both of those fall into behavior. So I still think that the first B of belief, it never appeals to me. I'm very much like, I need some evidence. The whole flying spaghetti monster, I feel, is a very good argument of why I am atheist agnostic. But belonging, I think community is super important. And behavior, having some architecture around behavior and rituals, I think is also important. So I don't think it has to be religious in the sense of believing in God, but having a community is important.
How did your friends react to you while you were doing this?
Well, it depended. Definitely depended on the friend and what they saw me doing. So I did actually. I remember when I went. I was with a friend when I stoned an adulterer.
You stoned an adulterer. Okay, first of all, how did you find a confirmed adulterer? And B, how did they react to being stoned?
It's a good question. And I was really getting into it because there is a lot of research that what you wear, your exterior, really has an effect on your interior.
Right.
I think so I was committed. I commit to the bit. So I had my robe and my sandals and I had the huge beard, and I live in New York. So I went to Central Park one day with my friend, and this man came up to me and said, "What's going on? Why are you dressed like?" And I said, "Well, I'm trying to follow all the rules of the Bible, from the 10 Commandments to stoning adulterers." And he says, "I'm an adulterer. Are you going to stone me?" And I said, "Well, that would be great. Thank you. That's an awesome offer.
I get to tick that box."
Yeah, exactly. Tick the box. And I took out a handful of stones because I had been carrying stones around for weeks, hoping to run into an adulterer. Here was a self-professed one. I showed him that they were very small stones, like pebbles, because I didn't want to, go to jail. And he turned out to be quite aggressive. He grabbed the stones out of my hand and threw them at my face. So I thought, an eye for an eye, also in the Bible, and I tossed one back at him. So that was the tick, exactly. I ticked that box. And of course, after the project was over, I did stop stoning adulterers. And Sabbath breakers. You have to stone a lot of people. Sabbath breakers, people who believe in astrology, which is so huge now. I'd have to be stoning everyone under 30 that I know because they love their astrology. You have to stone gay people, all sorts of terrible things. So luckily, I've given that up, and I've kept things like gratitude and the importance of rituals. But stoning is one. It was sort of I realized it was ridiculous, but the whole idea was to show, not the whole idea. Part of the idea was to show we should not be taking the Bible literally, because if you really do, if you commit to it, this is what you'll be doing.
So speaking of taking things literally, you've just finished doing a year of living constitutionally. So by the letter of the US Constitution. So I'm someone who has recently immigrated to the US. I'm embarrassed to say I hadn't actually ever read the US Constitution until researching this episode. I read it 2 days ago properly.
You did read it?
I knew bits of it. I knew what the First and Second Amendment were because you're always hearing about them, etc.
Right.
But I'd never actually sat down and read the full text. partly because I thought it'd be really long, but it actually is only 4,500 words, so it's not that long.
Yeah.
So thank you for finally driving me to do that. So anyway, it seems to me like at first glance, if you were to try and live constitutionally, it's really just a lot of like legal jargon and explaining how the US government is set up. So how did this actually manifest in your day-to-day life?
Well, first of all, you are not alone. I mean, polls show the majority of Americans have not read the Constitution. Everyone loves to have an opinion about it, but very few people read
I would
it.
have assumed, like, given how foundational it is to your country, like it's like as a Brit, we don't have a document like that of how our country works. So I would just have assumed that it gets taught in like middle school. It seems like something you could teach in middle school.
Well, they might assign it, but I can guarantee you that very few people read it. And they teach a very narrow look at the Constitution. The Constitution, that was one of the big lessons I learned. It is not a monolith. So, like what you say, part of it is very legalistic. It's sort of like reading the rules to the settlers of Catan. It is very much like how the government is going to work, how many votes you need to pass this, how many representatives that. That is one part of it. There's also the beginning 100 words, the preamble. That's sort of the mission statement. And that's actually lovely. The we, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect nation. And that has parts about the general good, which is someone who's sort of a consequentialist. I love that part about thinking about the common good.
Can you explain what you mean by as a consequentialist?
As far as I understand, I'm not a philosophy professor like Will McCaskill, but there are different ways to look at ethics. One of them is to think about what will be the cause the most good for the most number of people. And that is consequentialism or utilitarianism, as opposed to the idea of we should be looking at rights and duties, which is often called deontology or Kantian ethics. So I am very concerned about the greater good, which is what they call general welfare, the common good. And interestingly, they were very much more interested in the greater good back in the constitutional days than politicians are now. They're much more focused on rights. So back in those days, rights were balanced by responsibilities. It was much more about the community. Rights were not trump cards that said, I have the right to do whatever I want, and regardless of the consequences.
Why do you think that divergence has happened? I mean, I appreciate that's a very long and hard question to answer, but could it be something to do with the fact that people are so reliant on the Constitution now? Because that, in a way, it acts as like it's like a list of rights and rules handed down on high, almost like a deontological piece of paper.
Yes.
So even though its intention was actually consequentialist, like thinking about how do we do the best for the most people? What are the consequences of our actions? By the act of putting that ethos into a piece of paper with rules and regulations, it's created a kind of deontological way of thinking. Could that be possible?
I love that idea. And I think there's something to it. I mean, the fact that they have a Bill of Rights, which are the famous ones, the right to free speech, the right to bear arms, they, I believe, would have had a Bill of Responsibilities, but it was so in the ether. It was so assumed that you should have responsibility. And that manifested itself in many ways. You want to be part of the bucket brigade. Everyone's a firefighter. Every male adult had to serve in the military, in the militia, and every few months had to go and train in case there was a foreign invader. Now, I don't want to go back to that, but I do think we've lost this idea of community. And many other countries have these sort of mandatory service, a year, and whether it's in the army. I would prefer like a year of AmeriCorps, like where you have to go teach or dig ditches. Like that to me would be a nice, and that is in a sense originalist. That is a more early American point of view. And I think part of the reason we lost it is just we have, as you say, the rights were written down, the responsibilities were implied.
You mentioned the word originalists. So again, I learned that 2 days ago. There are originalists who are people who live by the letter of the Constitution. Is that correct?
Right.
Or they're saying
yes.
take it literally the way it was written, then we should take literally now. And then there are the sort of opposing camp, or they don't have to be opposing, I guess, but the other end of the spectrum, which is the living constitutionalists, who are people who are saying that we should, I guess, interpret it more liberally as times change and evolve. So can you explain kind of the sort of core disagreements or tensions between those two camps?
Sure, yes. Well, you said it beautifully. The originalists, which are mostly associated with conservatives. So now 5 of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court are originalist in some way. And as you said, they think the most important thing about interpreting the Constitution is the original meaning of the words when they were ratified in 1791 or whenever they were ratified. The living constitutionalists are often more liberal, more progressive, and they argue, well, that's a terrible way to go. I mean, times have changed so much that we have to change with them. So the words have to evolve, the meaning of the words. And I'll give you an example. The 14th Amendment came right after the Civil War, and it guaranteed due process and equal protection. But the original meaning of those words back then was referring to black men. That was the point of the amendment. So those people who ratified it were not thinking, oh, equal protection for women, for gay people, for trans people. That was not in their mind. So if you are a super hardcore originalist, such as Clarence Thomas, you might think that this equal protection phrase does not apply to women. It doesn't apply to gay people. So you would have to roll back the decision by the Supreme Court that said gay marriage is a constitutional right. They would argue it's not in the Constitution and it wasn't intended by those original framers. We got to leave it to the states, leave it to the voters. This is not something that should be made mandatory. Now, the more progressive people would say, well, that's a terrible way to think because equal protection has to evolve as we realize, as our moral circles expand and we realize that gay people deserve rights and women deserve rights. So that is an example of how they can diverge quite radically.
If you are an originalist, you're literally basically saying those founding fathers had a perfect snapshot of morality. That's what you'd be essentially saying, because you're putting yourself in their shoes and saying what they believed was what they intended and therefore put into this. So we have to perfectly adhere to them. And I mean, I doubt those guys even believe that they had a perfect snapshot of, I mean, I don't know their exact psychology, but if they were if they were actual sort of systems designers and thinkers worth their salt, they should have the epistemic humility to have known that their moral view was probably not a fully complete one. And I mean, as it was, there was 1 or 2 of them who were already slightly anti-slavery. I hope they certainly weren't all. They were some of them were pretty pro-slavery, right? But so even then, there must have been some disagreement between them. So there should have been some epistemic humility. So
yeah,
I would have been surprised if they would be like, oh wow, 300 years down the road, you're still listening to our exact moral framework. That seems silly. But I don't know, maybe I'm giving them too much credit.
No, I love what you say. And I just want to address dig into 2 things, which are both to me fascinating. First, there is the argument that I think progressives make, which I think has merit, that the founding fathers would not be originalist, or most of them, because they were very entrepreneurial. They were flexible in their thinking. So they would not want to be as frozen in time. The other point you made, and just to address the slavery issue, there were some who were pro-slavery. A lot of them recognized that slavery was a moral evil, and That is partly why you don't see the word slavery in the Constitution. It has euphemisms like servitude because they were embarrassed. And Thomas Jefferson wrote about what an evil slavery was, and he admitted he was a hypocrite. He was lazy, he was greedy, and he said, I don't want to give up my lifestyle. But he knew it was wrong. Now, just to address the other thing of epistemic humility, I love that because that is a big theme in my book. I do think that some of the founding fathers, at least, had great epistemic humility and were much more flexible in their thinking than a lot of people in politics now. And just to give you two quick examples of that, first of all, James Madison, who's considered the father of the Constitution, his last words on earth were that he changed his mind. He was on his deathbed. His niece was with him. He made a weird face, and the niece said, Uncle, what's the matter? He said, Oh, nothing. I just changed my mind. And then he died. So did he change his mind about Congress, about the wallpaper? Like, we don't know. But the fact is, the last thing he did on earth was change his mind. I love that. And the second example is Ben Franklin said the older he gets, the less certain he is of his own opinions. So he was big into epistemic humility. And he told this story at the convention. It's sort of like a joke parable where he said there was a French lady who said to her sister, It's so weird. I am the only person I have ever met who is right on every single issue. And his point, of course, was we all are the French lady. We all think, except for people who, like you, who are aware of their epistemic limits, we all think that we are right almost all the time. And he was saying that you got to be aware of your biases. So they were doing the sort of this cognitive bias, behavioral economics in a very primitive way 250 years ago.
I sense, if I had to pick, if you leaned in one direction, you seem more like a living constitutionalist to me, I'm going to guess.
Your guess is correct.
Steelman, the originalist side for me. Where are your biases against the originalists? What's the strongest case for being an originalist?
I love that question. All right. Well, yes. There are a few things that they could argue. First of all, originalism started because the Supreme Court in the 60s was very liberal and progressive. And a lot of the landmark civil rights cases that we know were from that court. It was called the Warren Court. So Brown versus Board of Education, which made segregation illegal, and the Miranda rights, which gave more rights to the accused, and intermarriage, the Loving case, where it said bans on marriage between races are unconstitutional. So liberals and progressives were cheering, this is great. Conservatives said, wait, this is not good, because these are 9 unelected people, and they are making decisions, these liberal decisions that change millions of lives, and America is not ready for it. This is something that should be voted on. So they said, we gotta have a different philosophy for these judges, that they are just going to focus on the most narrow text, what the text says, so that they can't go willy-nilly and impose their will on millions of Americans. So then a couple of the liberal justices died. Nixon appointed conservatives. Then you have a majority conservative court, and now they're the ones who are dictating what millions of people. And now liberals are like, oh wait, maybe that wasn't the best idea to have 9 unelected people saying what we should do. So originally, originalism was meant to constrain judges, to keep them very focused and narrow. That has not turned out to be the case. As you can see from the abortion rulings, they are not practicing restraint. They are making radical decisions. So another way to steelman it, though, is that the Constitution it's not a poem, it's not a metaphor. It is more like a contract or more like a recipe. And you don't go changing the recipe ingredients and instructions willy-nilly.
Right.
You have to have continuity. That's the whole point of society. You need some predictive behavior.
It's the rules of the game.
Yeah, so you can't in poker all of a sudden say, well, 2 pairs beats 3 of a kind, because that's the way I like it. So this is, if you want to have a civil society, you can change the Constitution. There's a way to make amendments, but while we have it as is, you've got to follow it the way it is. Did I convince you to be originalist?
You strengthened their case to me. You know, because I can see the argument of like, yeah, if you don't have, I mean, to me, it seems like, I mean, again, the theme of this show is about the win-win solutions, but this is truly a case where I think you want a bit of both. If you are an extreme in either direction, you're heading in a bad way. You need to have, you know, it doesn't have to be this trade-off. Let's find a higher perspective where you get the best bits of originalism and the best bits of living constitutionalism, and try and synthesize them. And it's difficult and it's nuanced, but that's where you're probably going to get a better outcome. But it's difficult because at the same time, like, you look at America, and yes, obviously it's got lots of problems, but it is still like, there's a reason I emigrated here. It is the best place to live. It really is. And like, I'm not knocking Europe. I'm not knocking the UK. I love it too, but I love it here. And it has so many core fundamental principles that you can't really find in most of the other parts of the world. You have it to an extent in Europe in some parts. But like key things like freedom of speech, now I'm going blank, but like core liberal values, like it's baked like the freedom to self-express, the freedom to conduct business, etc., has been baked into the US, and it has, you know, it has basically, it's been the number one country. It's led economically, and again, that's not to say it hasn't done some stuff wrong, but overall on net, it has been doing amazing things. So there's clearly something right in there that we need to adhere to. And I think most people who've lived in the West, you know, like a lot of the Western nations have like copy pasted many of those parts into them, just not officially. Like the UK has mostly got freedom of speech, not entirely, not as much as the US, but so yeah, it's a real dilemma, and I'm starting to to understand more why there is such sort of tension within the US a little bit around. I mean, do you think because we're seeing this almost like civil war, this ideological civil war going on in the US and much of the West between left and right, conservative, liberal, whatever you want to call it. Does this stem from this like disagreement over the Constitution, or is it something deeper?
It's a great question. I think the Constitution is more like a Rorschach test. So you see what you want to see. So I would say that the differences go deeper, and then they are expressed in how you interpret the Constitution. But you have differences such as, people who believe that government is a force for good and that you need regulations, versus those who say red tape is strangling us and we need a libertarian society. So, and even deeper than that, is it the case that if people were left largely unregulated, would we all act in a way that would make life better? Or is it the tragedy of the commons, where if everyone had no regulation, we would overgraze our cows, or we would destroy the environment? So those are two very deep, profound. And then religion, I think, is another huge one. I think a lot of your morality in America is based on religion. Like abortion, I think if you truly believe that there is a soul implanted during fertilization, then yes, it is murder. I understand. Then I don't believe that. So I am not bothered by, a 3-day-old embryo being taken away. That doesn't bother me. But if I truly believed that, then yes, I understand. So religion, to me, the belief system is causing some huge rifts.
Yeah, it's I think the tricky thing in any like major complex system, whether it's a country or civilization or group of people or whatever, it's like the trade-offs between optimizing for choice, allowing choice as much as possible, like true freedom to people make their own choices, but maximizing the area under the curve so that the most people can make the most choices over time. And sometimes you need some regulations to prevent these tragedy of the commons, or like, whether it's like race to the bottom or Moloch trap, whatever you want to call it, these situations where if everyone acts in their own self-interest, it ends up actually breaking the playing field, essentially. You need to have some degree of rule and regulations to minimize that, to like keep the play, as I say, maximize the length of time that the game can run at all. And then through that, give people as much choice as possible. So it's like, you need a small, like, to minimize the number of rules to maximize the amount of choice, but those rules have to safeguard these tragedy of the common situations. That's the like balancing act we've got to figure out. And
that's a great way to put it.
Any ideas how we has living constitutionally, like, is there anything, now we've sort of talked about that, has there anything that's springing to mind from your year of doing this that could help heal America and heal this like ideological divide?
As a matter of fact, yes. and there are two types. So there are sort of the very specific governmental fixes. And I don't want to get too in the weeds on those, but things like we should not have a Supreme Court without term limits. They should be kicked off after 18 years. I mean, they didn't live until they had a much shorter lifespan when the Constitution was written. So having someone on the Supreme Court for 40 years, they're like 89 and they're deciding about internet policy, and they don't understand how to turn on a calculator. It's like, that's bad. There's something called the supermajority in the Senate, where you need 60 people, 60 senators to approve any major legislation. And that is causing all sorts of problems. It was meant so that you didn't have the tyranny of the majority. But now it's so hard to pass anything except like naming a post office that we need to get rid of that. So there are very specific fixes that I think we could do. On a less specific level, but a more sort of psychological level, I think there are lessons from the 18th century that have changed me for the better. I mean, I don't want to go back to the 18th century. It was sexist, it was racist, homophobic, it was horrible and dangerous, and you
get an infection and you die.
It was the worst. And medicine was, I don't know, maybe your friend Brian Johnson can find if this is true, but they had tobacco smoke enemas, which meant they would literally blow smoke up your ass.
Is that where the phrase comes from?
It's unclear. I've spent way too long trying to figure out. There are some people who believe it is.
It'd be funny if the phrase came first and then it gave someone the idea to blow tobacco smoke up the ass.
Yes, maybe.
So the causality is all messed up.
But yeah, you would have a bellows. You'd have someone sort of pumping the smoke, and it would go up the hose right in your ass, and it was going to cure all sorts of things, stomach ailments, but also general. Anyway, don't go back. However, let me give you just two examples of. First is the one we already talked about, thinking more in a communal way, a more consequentialist way about how the society. Another is just the idea of cold takes, which I know is the great blog by, I forget his name, the founder, the GiveWell founder.
Holden Karnofsky, yeah.
Yes, there it is. But they were very into cold takes long before that. They hated the hot take, and also the technology lent itself to a cooler take, because you couldn't just have this outrage and immediately thumbtext a bunch of insults. You had to get out your quill pen, you had to dip it in ink, you had to write it, you had to fold it, you had to wax seal it, and it was just a sort of a waiting period for your thoughts. And I experienced that in my year. I loved writing with a quill pen. I went to actually an effective altruism party while I was doing this, and I brought my quill pen because I wanted people to sign it. And one of the people said that she can't use a feather because she's a vegan. So I do apologize to the geese that I took the feather from. I'm hoping that it just fell off the.
Wait, so you wrote your whole book in quill and ink, is that correct?
I wouldn't say the whole. I wrote a large part of it, thousands of words, and some I just, for deadline reasons, I had to use a computer. But I do love, and I don't think we should go back to quill pens, but handwriting or just cutting yourself off completely from the internet, that alone will change the way you think. It changed the way, it made me, I think, a more subtle and hopefully more profound thinker, because there are no dings and pings when you're writing with a quill pen from, a message saying, Jay-Z just cheated on his wife or whatever it is. You are able to concentrate.
So wait, you didn't use a phone or a computer for basically a year?
Yes and no. I tried whenever possible to use the technology of the time. So I had my musket, I had my candles, and I had my quill pen. And but the irony is I had to buy a lot of that on the internet. So I like bought my candles and quill pens over the internet. And I did. I had to read so many books about the founding fathers and their mindset, and it was sometimes just so easy to do it over the internet.
I see. So you weren't completely rigid. Like, you allowed some like flexibility and efficiency where the efficiency was so great. You had some kind of like internal trade-off going on, or what?
Exactly. That is exactly right.
Is there any thing that you did do that was 100% like based in the 1800s? Like toilet habit or the way you shaved or something like that?
Certainly there was the writing, there was the clothes. I committed to the bit, and so I had my 18th century clothes. I had my tricorn hat, which I'll put on right now. And the big lesson from the clothes is not to have this false nostalgia for a wonderful world. Because as we mentioned, it was sexist, racist, you get an infection, you die. And there are so many things, modern conveniences that I take for granted that I no longer I used to take for granted. For instance, elastic. I will never take elastic for granted again. I am so grateful for it because I had to put on my 18th century socks, which are these big wool stockings, and they don't have elastic. So they fall down your calves and pool around your ankle. So they had to put on sock belts. They weren't even garters. Garters were too sophisticated. They were just tiny little belts. Every morning I had to put on two belts, one belt on my left sock, one on my right sock. And so the amount of human labor that must have been wasted putting on sock belts is like, thank God for elastic.
They not only had like less convenient clothing technology, but they were also more strict in the way they really cared about appearances.
That's right. Exactly.
So just like massive inefficiency. Whereas people I don't know. I mean, people do, I guess, like will get dressed up and such, but when it feels like the average person when they're going down the shops really don't care about what they look like. And I know I definitely don't. I look like a complete slob. And I feel like that, maybe there were slobs in the day and just like they didn't make it into the pictures. I don't know. But yeah, so much human. Yeah, so it must have made you really appreciate the efficiencies of the little tiny things.
And like washing dishes. I mean, they didn't have sinks in their kitchens, so you had to go out to the well or to the river and get the water. And I tried to replicate that in a small way by going to the farthest bathroom in my apartment and filling it up and bringing it to the sink. I mean, to the kitchen, and then using the vinegar and water and sand to try to clean. So that was not the same, I will admit, as going to the river. But it just did give me a sense like, thank God for the sink. I mean, this is an amazing invention that We 99% of human history did not have it, and billions of people still in the world don't have it. So this idea of gratitude is a recurring theme in my work, and this was just another example of what to be grateful for.
You actually did a thing called a gratitude trail, right? One time as an experiment, you wanted to go on a mission to thank every single person that was involved in your cup of coffee.
Exactly.
So talk us through that.
Well, what happened was I've read all of the studies about how healthy gratitude is psychologically and even possibly physically. So as an atheist agnostic, I would try to say these secular prayers before my family had dinner. I would stand up, I would say, thank you to the farmer who grew these tomatoes. Thank you to the woman at the grocery who sold them to me. And my son, who was, 11 maybe, he said, why don't you thank him in person? Why are you telling us? We don't care. So I was like, that is a good idea. And that was the birth of this book idea. And I went with coffee, because I love my coffee. And I went around the world and I thanked everyone who had even the smallest role. So I thanked the barista, but I went to South America and I thanked the coffee farmers. And then I thanked the truck driver, but he couldn't have done his job of driving the coffee beans without the road. So I thanked the people who did the road. And it was like 6 degrees of separation.
Right. I mean, it never ends. You end up like thanking the first amoeba for crawling out the primordial soup. Like you keep going.
I did. That was in there.
Wait, what?
Thanking. It was, it's called Luca, Last Universal Common Ancestor. So it was like, a little, not even a cell that was in like an underwater volcano, they think was our last universal common ancestor, that is our great, great, great times 8 billion grandparent. So why not? Why not throw a little love that way?
In many ways, I don't know, what popped into my head as you're describing, like you realize you start being grateful for every little thing that has led you to this point, is essentially what you're saying. Doesn't that make you feel like a kind of reverence, almost like a godlike thing? Because it's in many ways you're being, that's what, whenever I've like felt like a quasi-religious experience, it is this deep sense of like awe and gratitude for this thing that is greater, whether it's like a conscious entity or not, I don't know, but it's like something that has given rise to this immense complexity of this world we live in, and every little thing that has happened to lead to this moment. That feels kind of godlike to me.
That is so interesting. I guess I see it as more as you don't have to go to God. And in fact, weirdly, when I did these prayers, I was like, well, why are people thanking God when it's fine to thank God, but also thank the people?
Yes.
Like you thank the farmers, thank the guy who's paid a low wage.
Okay, I would love to just kind of quick fire go through some of your other experiments. You outsourced your life for 1 month to this team in Bangalore, India. How on earth did you find a team that you trusted enough to do this? Because you didn't just outsource like your emails, you literally outsourced every type of decision, including like what arguments you would have with your wife. So
That's
like
it.
How did that play out?
Well, this was very early in the outsourcing. This was like 20 years ago. And only banks and law firms were outsourcing to India. But I'm a writer, and I thought it's an interesting idea. So I found this team of people in Bangalore who worked for banks, and I said, I'm not a bank, but can you help me? I just need someone to, you can order my stuff online. You can answer emails for me. As you say, argue with my wife for me. I had a 1-year-old son. You can read bedtime stories to him, and it was fantastic. I loved it, and that was a great. I mean, there were some language barriers, so there were problems. I remember I asked them to order wax paper, which is that thing you wrap fruit in, and they sent wax mustache strip remover for women. So my wife was like, "What are you trying to tell me? Like, that's not good." So, but it was a fascinating experiment. And actually, this guy called me after that came out, and he said, "I'm writing a book on like 20 something careers and how to work fewer hours. Can I use your article in my book?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. I'm not going to charge you for it because, he's a first time writer. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing." A year later, he calls and he says, "Hey, just wanted to know, my book's coming out. You're chapter 8 and it's #1 on Amazon." I'm like, "What?" Like #1 of all books. It was Tim Ferriss, and it was the 4-Hour Work Week. And my outsourcing is a chapter in his book, which turned out to be great for me in the end.
That's a win-win.
Yeah, because he has thousands of like cult followers, so they all know me from that.
How did your wife react to this? Because it feels like there's a theme in hearing all of these different life experiments that you've done that, for me as an observer, as your friend, I'm like, oh, this is hilarious, but I'm not having to live with this. Like if Igor did something like this, I could see it being fun for the first few days and then very quickly wearing thin. And especially as you would like stick to these things for a month or even a year or multiple years. Like was she aware of what she was signing up for when she married you? And like how, have there been any instances where like she really put her foot down, was like, enough of this?
Well, yes. I mean, there are quite a few. And yeah, she definitely has patience. Good part is I get a lot of readers who email and saying, "We love your wife. She's so patient." So I forward those to her and she feels better. There was the menstruation thing. There was with the outsourcing, it wasn't so bad because she got angry at me because I hadn't picked up cash at the ATM. I said, "Hold that thought." And I emailed my outsourcers and I said, "Listen, my wife is yelling at me because I didn't get cash. Can you just argue with her for me? I don't want to argue. Just tell her she didn't tell me to pick up cash. So how was I supposed to know we were low on cash?" And so the next day they email her, but they censor me completely. They were like my better half. So they, instead of saying this sort of nasty rebuttal, they sent her a big "I'm sorry" card with dancing teddy bears. And she was like, "Oh, that's so sweet." So it was actually better for her.
Wow.
But speaking of relationships, I want to talk because I remember either I heard it on one of your podcasts or you told me in person, but didn't you and Igor at one point, you predicted whether your relationship would last?
Yes.
Which I think was a very experimental thing to do. So can you tell me about that?
Yeah, we'd been dating for about 6 months, and I'd like to say there was a grand reason for us doing it, but I feel like it was just for shits and giggles. He asked me, he's like, what we were talking, I think we were talking about the power of doing predictions and like the importance of thinking in probabilities, even around unsavory things. And he was like, "Okay, what's your prediction that we'll be together in 3 years' time?" And then we were like, "Okay, let's make a formal prediction each. We won't, we'll secretly write down our numbers for 3 years, also in 10 years and 1 year, with the probability of us being together in each." And then we would compare at the same time and do like a big reveal. And I'll add a graphic to this to the video for people who are watching, because I talked about it in a TED Talk in the end. I think that's where you probably saw it.
That's where
it was in a TED Talk.
Yes.
And we're comparing our 3 probabilities. And we were fairly aligned, although he does point out that I was consistently less confident than him in all 3. But we were aligned enough. But we did it because, as I say, partly for fun, but also because it is actually useful. Because let's say I had felt the need to lie. And, I like in my gut was like, it's only like a 50-50 in 3 years or something like that. And then I found I was like writing down 80 or something. Well, even if I felt unable to tell him that's very valuable information for me.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
And that's why I think doing formal predictions, even on the like difficult things, the emotional things, it can be a very elucidating experience for yourself.
Interesting.
Ideally you want to be honest with your partner too. And him and I have always tried to cultivate this radical honesty approach to our relationship. And I mean, I know you've done that too, because you did an experiment in radical honesty, which I want to get to.
That's right.
But yeah, so it was a very, so many people, when I tell them about it, they're like, that's crazy. I would never do that with my partner. I'm like, well, that's a sign of something. Maybe go talk to them about why you can't do it,
And how long have you been together now?
10 years.
Oh, and what was your prediction of the probability for 10?
It was something in the realm of 80% or 70%.
Oh, okay. That's
70
good.
to, so 10 years is a long time to be making,
Right.
he was only 25, 26, and I was 29, nearly 30, something like that. So yeah, glad to say we're going strong.
I wonder if that made you increase the probability. I guess that's what you were saying.
There's probably a selection effect going on. If we were somehow to get the whole world that's in relationships to do this experiment, the ones that actually end up doing the experiment and so on probably have a higher probability of succeeding, because in the first place they're able to be comfortable playing this this possibly sketchy game with one another.
Right.
And yeah, so it's that's the difficulty with predictions, is that sometimes the act of making the prediction affects the likelihood of it happening in the first place. You can, it's hard to separate that causality chain, but
very interesting.
It's a good mental exercise. And also it trains you to think in probabilities.
Right.
In this vein of radical honesty, you lived truthfully for 1 month, where basically not only would you say the truth if someone asked, no matter how uncomfortable, but you even removed the natural filter that we have of just not saying what's on our mind, and you just let whatever was on your mind come out. So how did that one work out?
Well, that one, like everything, it had its wonderful parts and its horrible parts. And I did it because there's this psychologist named Brad Blanton who says that this is a better way to live. You're more authentic. You're going to have highs and lows, but you're more authentic and you'll be happier. I'm not sure that's true. I'll give you an example of one that I don't think worked and then another that did work. So we ran into my wife's friends from college, and they were like, "Oh, we were at a restaurant. So great to see you, and let's hang out in the future." And I had to say what was on my mind, which was, "You seem nice, but I have no interest in ever seeing you again, because I barely have time to see my high school friends or my college friends. So I don't need another person." And she was horrified. I felt like a total asshole, which I was.
Did you have to explain that you're doing that? She was aware you were doing the experiment.
Well, she wasn't. I tried to explain it, and I'm not sure how much it got across, because it was.
She was too stunned. Already.
Yeah, and my wife, of course, hated it. So I highly recommend against that kind of radical honesty. On the other hand, there's the positive radical honesty. For instance, if during that experiment, if I were thinking, "Oh, you know what? I love that boss I had 10 years ago, and he really taught me some great things." So I would call him. I felt I needed to let it out, or call him or email him and just tell him how grateful I was. And it was awkward, because I think culturally men are not supposed to be quite that open, but it was wonderful. I certainly felt good, and I think he did. Maybe a little stunned at first, but overall very positive. So I am very much for certain types of radical honesty, sustainable radical honesty.
So what's the clearest definition of sustainable versus unsustainable? Is it no white lies, but or are white lies allowed?
I think white lies are allowed if the long-term consequences aren't going to be bad. So, for instance, another one was this guy. I think he had some sort of mental illness. I can't remember what, but he would write poems and send them to me. and they were terrible. So am I going to say these are terrible? No, I am going to, and I've disguised I've changed the features, so hopefully even no one will know if, but the point is that, am I encouraging him to keep on wasting his time writing? I don't think so. I think more likely this is not something he wants to do as a full-time job, but it gives him pleasure, and he thought it would share it with me. If I shit on it, is that increasing the general good and encouraging him to do something that'll hurt him? Probably not, in my estimation. So I would say, oh, these are great, or find some compliment, like, oh, I love this phrase. Maybe there's one phrase out of 100 that actually I did love. So I'd focus on that. So that type of white lie, I think is okay. If it will cause consequences in the future, if someone really does think, oh, I'm going to be a screenwriter, but they are the worst writer ever, then yes, maybe you should have a sit down with them and say, you're talented in so many ways. Maybe this is not the one you were meant to do.
This kind of falls into the same kind of like slippery slope dilemma that you have with the originalists and living constitutionalists again, though, because it's like how all the heavy lifting relies upon the person deciding what those consequences, trying to predict what those consequences are.
So true.
So is it that like some people are good at that and therefore they can live this slightly more like flexible way, and others who are just not good at that should just live by the radical honesty type thing? Or is that now you're getting into this weird like two category thing? I don't know. It's again, it's this very messy kind of dilemma. My gut says, that's why I love poker and games of deception like Werewolf and social games like that, because I get that side of me out, like the tricky, deceptive side through those. And now I don't like it. Like, as I said, Igor and I like very much live by like full radical honesty. We really just tell, I have something on my mind, it comes out. Doesn't matter. I have a crush on someone, whatever. That's just what I do. And was how we've like cultivated our relationship, and it really works. And my gut says if the world could like emulate that, I think it would be it would be a net beneficial thing, just because it seems to be working so well in our relationship.
No, that's fascinating. By the way, just one sidebar. I once played a very interesting game of Werewolf. I used to write for Esquire magazine, and I interviewed the magician David Blaine.
Mm-hmm.
And we got along enough that he said, hey, do you want to come to my friend's house tonight? We're going to play this game Werewolf, which I hadn't played. And I was like, sure. So I get there, and it is Edward, wait, what's his name? The award-winning actor, the great actor, Edward Norton.
Mm-hmm.
It was Edward Norton's house. And there were about 20 people, 10 of whom or more were crazy famous. Like Danny DeVito was there. And there was Seth Rogen and Paul Rudd and a bunch of other people.
So you're playing Werewolf against professional actors.
That's it. It's like playing basketball against LeBron James. I was like, I am so out of my depth. And I failed miserably because Edward Norton was so convincing. He was the werewolf, but he was like so outraged when someone would bring it up. He would go on a rant about how stupid you were if you thought it was him. And I was like, okay, I guess it's not you. And so I'd be like, well, it's not him. And I got kicked out. And of course it was him. So yeah, that was my experience playing Werewolf. I was outmatched big time. It'd be like playing poker against you. It would be like if you and I played poker. That would be the extent of it.
If you think professional actors are good, you should play in our games crew where it's a lot of poker players and good games players.
That's true.
It is something else, because it's one thing to be able to act well, to act innocent, but you need to also be able to add on the layers of logic of why you need. It's not just about like act a convincing story. You need to the story needs to make sense. Well, you've almost got to like cover your ears and eyes of how they're looking and sounding and actually listen to what their words, not the way they present the words.
Well, yeah, that would be the only thing scarier, I guess, playing against you.
What was it like after you did that month of telling your first lie again?
Yeah, it was kind of freeing because, well, actually, you know what? It's the opposite of freeing because a lot of times I find when you have this this structure, this architecture to your life where you don't have to make as many decisions, that there is something lovely about that. The whole paradox of choice, that when you have too many choices, it's very stressful. So when I do these projects, like with the Bible project, uh, do I shave today? No, I don't have a choice. If a homeless person asks me for money, yes, I give it to him because the Bible says to help those in need. So there was something lovely about having a structure. And in that case, the structure was you don't have to remember your lies. That is one of the hardest things about lying is remembering what you told whom.
Right.
And so I had none of that. That was very liberating. So I guess it was in some senses, it was good because I didn't have to tell people that I don't want to ever see him again. But it was also back to the stress of remembering and figuring out when to lie and when not to.
How do you choose which experiments you do?
Well, partly I have to get sign off from my wife. So I have had a lot of readers suggest ideas. And one of the recurring ones is that I should be the greatest lover of all time and do all the positions in the Kama Sutra and learn how to be the greatest lover. And I did bring it up to my wife, and she was like, no fucking way. That's terrible. And I agree with her. I have no interest in that. I just brought it up as just to see. But I leave that to someone with more youth and flexibility. So first, sign off. Secondly, I feel it has to be something where at the end, there will be lessons that can be generalizable to myself, my life outside of this, and also to the reader. So that would be things like slowing down my thinking or being grateful. All of these are lessons, and I feel it has to have potential for that. Uh, and I like to take on the biggest topics I can, like religion or the Constitution or gratitude, and then that allows me to look at it from 100 different angles.
Are there any experiments you would really love to do, but you feel like you can't?
There's one that I think you would be great at. Maybe you are already. I tried actually for a little bit to become a mentalist. The ones who can sort of read minds, look at the way, and I was just not talented enough. Maybe if I had 5 years, I could do it. But I had a deadline. I have to come out with books, so I did not get to do. Have you ever tried?
Not actively. I mean, I've obviously playing poker, you're trying to read people. And I mean,
Right.
I'm always trying to read someone if, I don't know, I think they're talking about some, a big, powerful person talking about a new technology they're building. And I'm trying to read like through the video I'm seeing on the internet, like, are they actually being honest here and so on? But no, I have not actually pursued mentalism as a pursuit. Is it actually real?
Well, it's not. I don't think ESP is real, but I think from what I've read, it'd be interesting to know, but from what I've read, you can learn to pick up cues and read people better. I mean, the proof is people like, what's his name?
Darren Brown.
Darren Brown. I mean, unless he's hiring all these people and they're all shills, what he does is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think it is accurate. And I actually, funny enough, I was on a TV show years ago called what was it called? The Mind Control Freaks. And I mean, I think I was mostly, because I had the poker player thing and they wanted me to fill this like female femme fatale role. But two of the other people, like hosts on the show, claimed to be mentalists. One was a hypnotist and one was a mentalist. And it was astonishing. It was so shocking. Some of the things, like they hypnotized a guy to believe that I was his girlfriend instead of his real girlfriend, who I met behind the scenes. I mean, we looked kind of similar, but I was obviously not his girlfriend. And they had hypnotized him such that if I would like touch his ear in the same way that she touches his ear, that he would believe that it was her, that I was her. And I went and sat down thinking, okay, there's no way this is going to work. And I had an earpiece in, where, you know, with her like saying, oh, this is what I would answer this, because like, if any question came up that I should know the answer to, because the I should have said the premise of this bit was that, him and her were coming to be interviewed about love. It was a TV show about love. So that's why all the cameras were there and they were meant to be doing this interview. But then as the interview was about to start, she excused herself to the bathroom and I came in, and he had been pre-hypnotized without his consent, which raises a whole load of questions. Like they thought, he thought he was doing a some kind of relaxation technique before the episode. They said, oh, we do this for all our like interviewees. And they'd hypnotized him during that time with like a picture of me that I was his girlfriend. And
that is weird.
Unless the whole setup was to punk me, the presenter, but then they never did a reveal and they never presented the show that way, then it was legit, because the guy truly thought I was his girlfriend for like 5 minutes. He pulled me and sat me on his lap. Because I remember being to the producers, I was like, what am I going to have to do? Like it was one of the craziest experiences of my life, actually. I should, I'll see if I can get the footage and upload it to either this or to my YouTube, because it was nuts. So
I would love to see that.
Yeah, now you mention it, yeah, I think mentalism must be real, and it would be frankly crazy if we're living in a world where there are a percentage of people who can have that level of control over someone. Now, I do remember the hypnotist saying that it only works if the person kind of like is willing to be like hypnotized in the first place. But they did that one under false pretense, right? Because he thought that he was doing like a meditation relaxation thing.
Well, I do feel that I am so suspicious and skeptical that it would be very hard to hypnotize me, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe in this interview you're going to hypnotize me.
Maybe that's maybe all I'm doing. Maybe this whole show is hypnotizing people en masse.
Have you been hypnotized yourself?
No. I mean, I've done like meditation techniques and been in, you know, altered states of consciousness through those kind of things. And certainly you can get yourself into suggestible states, but I would like to think that I've only done it in ways where I'm like willingly, I know what I'm doing, you know, I'm like, oh, I want to be suggestible right now.
Got it.
And I think it's you can do, when someone's in this like open-hearted state, basically, you can, I guess, like shape their mentality in a way.
Right.
And so it is important to like be somewhat careful around who you're doing this with. But it makes me now wonder, as like AI is getting better at manipulating
great
people.
Point. Yeah.
Who knows? Like
AI hypnotists. Oof. That should be easy. Yeah.
That's an info hazard. That would be a very interesting experiment. I agree. Like trying to be a mentalist, but doing it in an ethical way. And I don't even know if it would be, I guess, the moral reason to do it would be to show the world that whether such a thing is possible and how to protect themselves psychologically from having that done to them, particularly as technology is getting better.
Oh my goodness, right?
So, I mean, it sounds like a big part of doing these immersions and these social experiments is building new habits. It's like, because you're forcing yourself to adopt new habits, whether they're good or bad. As someone who like consistently struggles with certain bad habits, and always looking for like new hacks of like how to get rid of them, and you know, like I've gotten one of these little phone safes to lock my phone away in, etc. But
yes,
I haven't successfully built up the habit of using it. Like I forget that it's there, etc. Are there any like tips that you can give for people who are trying to develop new healthy habits or get rid of old ones?
Sure, I can tell you what has worked for me. One is definitely micro goals. I am a huge fan of micro goals. So instead of saying, oh, I'm going to get on the treadmill for half an hour, I sort of trick myself into it. So I'll say, all right, I may or may not be on the treadmill for half an hour, but I am going to commit to putting on my sneakers. That's it. I don't have to get on the treadmill. But then I have the momentum. I've got my sneakers on. It's like, well, I might as well get on the treadmill. I'm not going to commit to 30 minutes, but I'll commit to 30 seconds. And then I'm on there. I'm like, you know what? I can do this at least 5 minutes. So that to me is very effective. These micro goals, instead of saying I'm going to write a book, say, I'm going to write 300 words today. And then so make it into chunks that are digestible and doable. There's another strategy that I found incredibly effective. I don't really use it anymore, but in case it helps anyone else, it's this idea of almost blackmailing yourself. And I think it was developed by this Yale psychologist. And the idea was you would say you don't want to smoke cigarettes. You would say, if I smoke a cigarette, well, let me give you what it was for me. It was dried mangoes, which are mangoes. They're delicious.
No, I know them. Yeah.
And yeah, but they're basically sugar.
Yeah.
They're candy. Like, they've taken all of the liquid out and it's just sugar. And I knew they were making me fat. So I'm like, all right. I said to my wife, I'm not going to have a dried mango. And if I do, you are going to send this check off. And I made out a check for $100. And you can either do it to a charity, but if you really want to be effective, do it to an anti-charity. Write that check to someone you hate. So I wrote a check to the American Nazi Party for $100. And I said, if I eat a dried mango, I am serious. You send this check, like not bluffing. And she's like, all right. And I have not eaten a dried mango in 16 years. It is
Wow.
so, maybe less, maybe 10 years. Because I'm not gonna freaking support the American Nazi Party. It is so effective. So if I really needed to quit something like cigarettes, that I do think, and there are websites that will help you set it up. I think one is called stick.com, stickk.com. And you can put in sort of your goal and then your anti-charity, and I think they may even send it off for you, like you put in your credit card.
Oh, wow. So you just have to be honest when you do the bad thing. If you eat a piece of mango. Yeah. I mean, I wonder if so funny enough, I did a similar thing like that with a good friend of mine. You actually know him, Tim Urban, who was struggling to get the first edit or one of the edits of his book done by a certain date. And so we agreed that he would have to send, I think, some absurd, like it was like 10% of his net worth to an anti-charity that he couldn't stand. And I think I even threw in some money of my own on top of it if he didn't get there. And he damn well got the book done. Although even then he's still the dude's got the most successful TED Talk of all time on procrastination, his like issues with procrastination. Even then he got it barely by the deadline, like a few hours.
Funny.
So powerful stuff, but it got it done. So yes, I can absolutely attest to that one. Although I weirdly haven't incorporated enough for myself. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, maybe I need to go back to it. I mean, it was so effective. I don't know. There is the stress of you really don't want that money to go.
Yeah. So to finish up, I would love to talk a bit about your book that you wrote on puzzles. It's called The Puzzler Book. And I've never struggled to get through, I was like, oh shit, I'm interviewing AJ in 4 days. I've got to get through this book or like at least skim it. It is not a book you can skim, at least certainly not for someone like me, because it's full of puzzles. At every chapter, it's like, here's 5 of the most interesting puzzles you've ever seen. So I would just be like trying to skim and then I'm stuck like for the next half an hour trying to solve some of these damn things. Well,
that is a lovely compliment. Thank you for being stuck.
So I would love to dig into like the reason why you both wrote that book, which is you make quite a bold statement, which is you believe that puzzles can help heal the world. So explain why.
I do, yes. A little bit, maybe a little hyperbole, but
okay.
I do think, we've talked gratitude and curiosity. Curiosity, I think, is one of the greatest virtues that we have. And I think you had her on your show, Julia Galef.
I
Have you
haven't,
had her
not
on?
yet.
Well, she wrote a great book called The Scout Mindset, which was all about how we should sort of have an explorer's mindset. We shouldn't come in with preconceptions. We should look and always be curious. And my version of that is the puzzler mindset, because I have loved puzzles since I was a kid, not just jigsaws, but crosswords and mazes and word scrambles, you name it. And what I love about it is that it's a game and you're trying to get to a goal. And so what I like is the idea of reframing problems as puzzles. And in fact, the musician Quincy Jones, that is his life philosophy. He says, I don't have problems, I have puzzles. Because even just that reframe, problems are there's such a negative word and it's intimidating and it makes you stressed. Puzzles, you're like, okay, let me roll up my sleeves and see how we can solve this. It's very solution oriented, which I love. So whether it's, I have a puzzle in my marriage, like how do we how do we solve what to watch on TV without screaming at each other, or a puzzle with raising my kids, that's to me, the biggest, well, I don't know, but certainly one of the most um, important ways to reframe the world and as puzzles is when you disagree with someone. And so if you are on the opposite end of the political spectrum, the way I used to do it would be to try to like beat them down with facts and evidence. And that did not work. That would just make me angry, them angry.
They dig their heels in further, etc.
Right, exactly. So instead, I try to reframe discussions with people I disagree with as puzzles. Why do we believe what we believe? What is the evidence we have? Where did we come up with these beliefs? What evidence is there that might change my mind or her mind? And if we do continue to disagree, then what can we do to move forward? Is there anything productive that we can do while acknowledging we disagree? That to me, it's much more productive. You're much more likely to come up with that something tangible that we can do. And B, like anger is an unpleasant emotion. I mean, some people I think thrive on anger. I think some people like it, and especially now. I don't. I find it incredibly unpleasant. So if I can avoid anger, that's a plus as well. So that is the way I think having this shared goal where you're in it not as a debate, you're in it as a shared adventure of why do we believe what we believe and what can we do? And that cooperative adventure is very win-win. It's a very win-win. It's not zero sum where I'm going to crush them and they're going to crush me. It's like, let's do this together and figure out how we can both come out of it with a positive result.
Yeah, it's like you've got this problem where it's like when you're in it, you're the other side of the tennis court from this person. It's like, but then it's like almost like you both stepping off the tennis court every half an hour to discuss the interesting things that happened. Like, oh, when you hit that serve and I couldn't, I then thought about doing this. So it's like that you can have that moment of collaboration where you work together and like observe it from a higher dimension. Almost, you're like looking outside the box, so to speak, discussing it together, and then you can dive back in and continue with your competition and go back out again.
Right.
It's injecting curiosity into a conflict, and when you start injecting curiosity, which is a very key part of human nature, as well as conflict, like needing to be right, needing to be the winner, they're both core elements. But if you can find a way to combine the two, then you can have this like higher order of wisdom emerge. Essentially, you can find a shared solution, or at least you stand a chance of finding a shared solution when you can both step outside it and see the game for what it is, see the conflict for what it is, with a degree of curiosity.
Our mutual friend Will McCaskill he had an idea which I think is brilliant, where instead of debate societies in high schools, you have people who try to from different points of view, and then you try to incentivize them to come to explore together why they disagree and can we come to a solution. So sort of an anti-debate society, and I love that idea.
Yeah. It's about like finding what are the core things that you do. Okay, we disagree on a lot of things, but there might be some things that we actually agree on. Let's see if we can actually find them. And that's a puzzle, exactly, as opposed to like a competitive game. But speaking of competition, because I mean this is a podcast about competition, how would you describe yourself as a competitive person? You know, you're clearly someone who loves puzzles, you love intellectual pursuit. You get what I call nerd sniped, clearly quite easily with like, you describe how you go through, like much of your day is dictated by when the various daily puzzles like Wordle or the spelling bee come out or the daily crossword, right? So would you describe yourself as a competitive person?
That is interesting. I think I've changed. I used to be much more competitive. I think I'm still competitive, but in a less angry way. Like I still like the idea of winning, but I try, and it's an uphill battle, not to be angry with myself or other people when I lose, and just more see it like a puzzle. Oh well, that didn't work that time. Let me try another strategy. Um, and the other I did for this puzzle book, I did participate in the World Jigsaw Puzzle Championships and it was in Spain, and I was totally unqualified because I am not really a jigsaw fanatic. I think it's fine, but there are these people who spend hours every day jigsawing, and I got in sort of because no one else from the United States entered because it was the first year of the jigsaw tournament, and I I was totally outmatched. I brought my family with me. It was the four of us, and we had 8 hours to do 4 big puzzles, 2,000 pieces. We finished 1 and a third puzzle. The Russian team finished all 4 puzzles in like 3 hours. And we were like, what?
Wow, so they're like an order of magnitude faster than you guys, like 10x.
Order of magnitude. I mean, it was wonderful in some sense to watch. Anyone at that level, whether it's poker or basketball or jigsaw, is just the best in the world. I loved it. And they had all sorts of meta strategies that I had never thought of. Like if you shouldn't always do the border first. It's a very colorful puzzle. Start with the colors. Or if it's a monochromatic, if it's like a big blue sky, sort by shape instead of sort by color. So they had all of these tricks of where they had to decide which strategy to pursue, and I loved that level. But we came in second to last, so we were not last, but we were second to last, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with second to last. I felt that was a good good place. At least we weren't last.
Yeah, so it goes to show that like just being good at puzzles is not sufficient to go and enter the world championships of something for the first time.
Right.
You need to train.
No, these people every day, hours a day.
So you say you used to be competitive and now you're not. What do you think it is that has made you? Would you say that you have a healthier or less healthy relationship with competition? And if so, what made you become that way?
It depends how you define competitive. If you define competitive as like I like winning, yeah. But if you define it as I get furious when I don't, that is what I used to be. And that is something I work very hard to try not to be. And sometimes I fail and sometimes I succeed. Part of it, I think, is rooting for my kids to beat me. I like it when my kids beat me at chess or at games or at cards, which is interesting. I remember reading about Ronald Reagan. I read his son's autobiography and how Reagan was a great swimmer and he beat his son. And then one day when his son was 18, his son beat him, and it was a terrible day for Ronald Reagan. I love it when my kids beat me. Like, I am like, this is the greatest because I know, I've had my peak. I'm on my way down. I want them to thrive. So I have very little competitive spirit with my kids.
It sounds like you're describing that it's, in many ways, you see the kids as an extension of yourself, or like you're able to expand your definition of self such that you can feel happy at their success or something like that. Because you can't have like the unhealthy, you need some degree of separation. You need to see someone as the other in order to have this unhealthy competitiveness. Be like, they are my opponent, they are my enemy, they are definitively different from you, such that you can be competitive with them. Whereas with your kids, it's you love them so much that you almost see them as an extension of yourself. I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but I wonder if there's a degree of that makes you therefore like see, like you get such joy out of seeing them beat you, because it's like, wow, this is.
Well, that's a great point. Well, I would say that reminds me, I think maybe there is a sense of sort of the expanding circles of morality. And I remember a few years ago, my kid was on a soccer team, and they were kicking the other team's ass. So it was like 12-0. And I started to feel very anxious for the other team. And so I started to root for the other team. And I did it verbally. I didn't even know, but I was like, come on, you got it. And the other parents on the sideline were like, what the hell are you doing? But my feeling was, my team is going to win, but I don't like the reason why I like effective altruism is one of the reasons is the whole idea is to lessen suffering, whoever it is. So I don't want the other team to suffer. I would like them to, lose, but lose by 2 goals instead of by 12 goals. So maybe there's a little of that, the sort of the effective altruism mindset of trying to lessen suffering has made me a little less competitive in certain ways.
One of the lines you have in the book is that maybe we should take something like climate change, which is a very fraught topic. It gets people very emotional. They tend to dig their heels in. They either believe X or believe Y about it. And you say we should stop calling it the climate crisis and reframe it by calling it the climate puzzle. And I think that's kind of. I mean, I don't know if that's going to land. I would love it, but imagine that being in Congress or at the UN. So how do we solve the climate puzzle, guys? I think I'm sold on it though, because there's something in that term. It's like puzzle. It's like, ooh, everyone's like, because there's a childishness to it. There's an innocence. Yeah. It takes away the drama, even though something can be very dramatic. I don't think it's going to, I guess the naysayers would say, oh, well, now you're diminishing the urgency of it. You're making it seem less important. And it's like, well, I think we're all aware enough that it's important enough. We just need to turn down the temperature so we can think a little bit. It comes back to this hot take, cold take thing. We need to be able to think about this rationally and with a bit more just curiosity and inspiration in our hearts. And so that little word might be sufficient.
I love that. And I think it shows the importance of framing. I am a big fan of framing. I read a fascinating study about the prisoner's dilemma. If you call it the Wall Street game, people act differently than if you call it the community or cooperation game.
No way.
Yeah, according to I'm skeptical of single studies, but that's what this one study said. Another single study that's I'm probably skeptical of, but I love the story, is they gave people this certain smell, and they told half the people that they were smelling Parmesan and half the people that they were smelling vomit. And then they asked them, how they felt about it. Did they like the smell? And of course, the Parmesan people are like, oh yeah, that's delicious. It smells great. I mean, they have chemically a very similar smell.
Yeah, they do.
So yeah, that I sometimes think, life may give you vomit, but let's try to reframe it as Parmesan, and maybe things would be better.
So there we go. Huge thank you to AJ for such a fun conversation. Huge thanks to you guys as well, of course, for tuning in. Do check out some of his books and writings, all linked below in the show notes. Or if you want, check out his Puzzler podcast. It's excellent. And as always, if you enjoyed this, Please tell your friends, whether that's digitally or verbally, whatever you like, just please tell your friends. Win-win. Thank you, and I will see you soon.